Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
Of mobile application programming. This week we are getting into Flutter, and remember Flutter is that cross-platform Android and iOS native building mobile app development framework. And we looked at Android and Google last week, Android and Java last week, which is good. There's a lot of code that's already written that way. But a lot of developers are using something like Flutter. There's a couple other choices like React Native also, which we'll look at. But Flutter is a common choice now for building applications that'll work on Android, iOS, on the web, and on the desktop. All from a single code base, which is really cool. So this get started link goes to install. Here I have a link directly to it also. Alright, and of course this is the same one that we did in our mobile app presentation. So if we go into course documents, we can get it there. I'll have it beneath this video, or you can just find it on Flutter's site too, right? So either way, we go here, we want to click on install. So we're going to install Flutter. We're going to click on Windows to download it. We pick one, or of course if you're on another OS, you can pick something else, excuse me. But I'm going to pick Windows. It needs PowerShell and Git. I'm going to click on download. This download was kind of slow, so I just did it a minute ago before I started. So then I'm going to copy that, and I want to put that in the root of my C drive. I make a folder called Flutter, paste it in here, extract it all here. So I want this, and this is the case for most mobile application development, whether it's Windows or Linux, Mac OS, etc. I'm typically going to use like the C drive or the D drive. I'm going to make a folder right at the root of that drive called Flutter or Android SDK or whatever. And I want to make sure I put all my files right there. So the idea is, we had a problem with this a couple times in class, is if your paths get too long, Android Studio can go in and use Gradle to build a project, or just making a project itself. It can make files that go really far down in terms of path length and too long for what Windows can handle. Like we had a problem where a student put a project on their desktop, and the combination of C or D, doesn't really matter, but C or D, users, username, desktop, folder name, project, etc., was too long. So I'm using C Flutter here. I want to put projects and stuff on those kind of folders too. Something short. So anyways, I take the Flutter SDK, I unzip it. Once I do that, I'm going to cut it out of here and move it up so it's in just C Flutter. This was another part that caused some trouble. So let me get rid of that subfolder. So basically, after I clear everything out, the idea is I want to make sure that I get my files in a folder called C:/Flutter right here, and everything is right in that folder. So if I were to go to C:/Flutter/bin, I'd see Flutter. Okay, that's what I'm going for, is something like this kind of a path. It could be on the D drive, it could be on the C drive. In this case, I picked C. My C drive has like 20 gig free. I'm always fighting that, but I knew that Flutter's SDK isn't really that big, so no big deal which one I pick. So I get the Flutter SDK. I could go to their archive if I wanted to get older versions. So like this, the reason I mention this is that in some cases you might have some code that you find online that only works with some old version. So for some reason, they changed something. Like, it looks like these probably aren't major differences, you know, and Flutter isn't that old. This is probably a bigger issue for Android and different versions of Android because there's so many, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And Flutter, there's only a few versions, so shouldn't be that big of an issue, but that is available. So we extract it, the zip file. Let me bump this up. So we extracted the zip file and placed the contained Flutter in the desired location, like CSRC Flutter, and don't put it in some funky folder. They're saying it's similar to what I'm talking about. So the idea is, if I go right to the root of the C drive, and I might have to have admin permissions to do that, it might not automatically let me to do that. Like when I right click here, the way I'm logged in as administrator on my machine, so I can just do it. You might see the shield there and have to click yes for user account control. I turn that stuff off on my machines, but the point is, short folder in the root of the drive. Alright, I've beaten that to death. So you do that, and they talk about updating it via Git. We got the latest version, we're cool. Now we have to update our path. So if we want to run Flutter commands in the regular Windows console, we're going to add this. So we want to go to the Start menu, Environment Variables. We want to edit the environment variables for your account. We'll do this and try to do it this way. I've had to add it the other way, but under User Variables, check to see if there's an entry called Path. Then we want to add, if the entry exists, append the full path to Flutter bin using semicolon. It's a separator from existing values. If it doesn't exist, put it in there on its own, of course. So in our case, it already exists. So we're going to add, sorry for the crazy background, C Flutter bin to it. So if we go back to that path, we should see that. It's an option. So once we do that, we're going to run Flutter Doctor to see what it sees, basically. So I don't really have to go in here, but I will. So Flutter Doctor is not seeing that my licenses are accepted. So I'm going to select that, Control C, copy, Control V, Android licenses. I already read these ahead of time. So then I run Flutter Doctor again. We're in good shape. We've got Flutter, we've got the Android toolchain, which is building for Android. So we're just looking for plugins and VS Code install. So this is something similar to what you might see. You might not see the Android toolchain if it can't see if Android Studio isn't installed and installed correctly beforehand. I already had Android Studio installed and installed correctly beforehand. You probably should too, anyways, from the GeoQuiz example from last week. So we got to add plugins next, yo. Talks about this stuff here, right? Android setup, install Android Studio. We already did that. Set up the emulator, we did that. Next step, set up our editors. We have to add our plugins. Start Android Studio, open plugin preferences, and get the marketplace and get the Flutter plugin. It's going to ask for Dart also at the same time. So file and settings, plugins. So I went to File, Settings, Plugins. This is really like a whole application on its own. Similar to one you'd see in Unity. Almost everything has these kind of plugins, which is super, super cool. Makes life super easy as a developer. first off, we're searching. We went to File Settings, Plugins, and under Plugins, we searched for Flutter, and then we're going to accept this third-party notification. It also wants to install Dart. Remember, Dart is a programming language underneath. We like that. That sounds good. But I'm not going to get into every single one of these right now. But there's a ton of cool stuff in here too for you to check out. Other add-ins for Flutter, other stuff that you could do, snippets of code that you could get for free, that kind of stuff. Alright, so with the Flutter and Dart plugin, let's let this do its thing and get opened up. It's indexing, whatever. I'm going to give it a second to finish up so that when I run Flutter Doctor, it has the latest and greatest data from Android Studio. It's probably fine, but I'll give it a second. Yes, sounds good. I want to make the projects better. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Set up editor, install Flutter Dart plugins. Yep, we did that. We don't see any complaints there. I'm going to run my Flutter Doctor again. Android Studio's looking good. Boom. Now VS Code. We open up VS Code, go to extensions, type in Flutter, click on install. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and germs, it could not be much easier. Could it be much easier? This has hot reload also. Very nice. Android Studio, remember, comes from JetBrains. JetBrains has the JetBrains toolbox that you can use to keep track of and install all these awesome applications like PyCharm, WebStorm, IntelliJ, Android Studio, PHP Storm, other stuff for looking at .NET DLLs and seeing how they work. The inside WebStorm is super cool, works super fast. I really like their products, they work really good. And so anyways, Visual Studio Code, Android Studio both have the plugins. Let's see what we got. Now let's just complain about connected devices. That's fine. That's really just the emulator piece of it. So now that we have this, we should be able to go to File, New, and New Flutter Project. That's really our next step. So the next step is to take a test drive. Go to basically what I was just doing, start new Flutter projects, the Flutter application, hit next, verify the SDK, and it'll start it up. So, File, New Flutter Project. I'm just going to keep it simple. We'll make one, then we'll go back and do what we have to do for our startup name generator. But Flutter application, I hit next. Flutter app underscore example, and let's see if we can find our SDK. Oops. See Flutter bin. Oops. No. Hey. What is going on here? Nah, I don't want to do that. C Flutter should be good. Let's exit Android Studio and try that again. Trying to think if there's anything I missed. C. They had us add our path under the user level, and I'm not so sure about that. I feel like I've had problems with that finding the SDK before because of that. But maybe not. Maybe I thought I opened and closed Android Studio. Maybe I do it twice. This is our example package. We can leave this by default. Kotlin and Swift support would allow us to do native app development. If we have to do anything natively for these. Let's see if we get our main.dart. And widget test. I think I probably have to set up my emulator piece also. But I've got the main Flutter project working. So that's really my biggest piece to start with. My emulator, I can do that separately. I wonder if I just don't have one set up in AVD. Let's create a virtual device and see if it's happy with it. Pixel 2. I'm debating if I want something smaller. That's good screen resolution. That's probably fine. And thought I already had one of these set up, but guess not. Oh, this is going to take forever. Debating. Do I pause the video? Edit this part out? Let it run? Make you fast forward through the video? Cover something else in the meantime? We could do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. I can just put titles up about what I'm doing anyway. So, while that's downloading, one of the other things that I wanted to mention this week, kind of a bit off topic, but there's a ton of free games and free courses. I'm sure you guys have probably heard about this stuff, but I wanted to include a bunch of links to them with the video. Some of these are really cool. 450 Ivy League courses you can take online right now for free. I thought that was really cool. Unity stuff, it's really fun to learn about. I mean, I teach game development class that talks about it too, but there's a lot of cool free stuff that's out there to check out. I think that one of the advantages in Harvard is another one that's really good. One of the advantages that you could have right now is you could take this opportunity to take some of these online certificates. Some of these are like a few hours, don't take really long to do, or just specific courses, that kind of thing. Why not grab a couple of them while you have the time, There's also a bunch of games, of course. GOG, Good Old Games, has a bunch of free ones you can check out. There's a big stay-at-home movement with a bunch of free games and different stuff that you can play, I'm sure you know about. So you can get all those, of course, but I just want to reiterate, the amount of courses that are available online are really, really substantial. There's a lot of free stuff that's available, way more than there was a couple weeks ago. So take advantage of that opportunity. I think it's really good. Both, since there's some time to do it, and because there's more stuff that's available now that wasn't available before. So I would check out both, again, some fun game stuff, but try to grab a certificate of some kind or a couple of courses and do them. A lot of them are easy to do online. There's not a lot of extra BS. It's pretty fun. So I would do those. At the end of this, I want to have a discussion board for posting examples for Flutter, and then also I wanted to mention tests. So probably later this week, next week, sometime in there, I'll set up a test, and the test will be online, multiple choice, true, false, that kind of thing. Just like our previous test, take as many times as you want, So look for that probably within the next week. And let's see how we're doing on downloads. Oh man, 42%. I think I'll. Alright, so downloading the image took probably about 10 minutes, and then the initial build probably took about 3 or 4 minutes also. But once that is done, as we can see, Flutter is working. This is our Dart that creates this initial application. There's basically, in Dart applications, there's a set of widgets, right? So we talked about this a bit before. There's a home page widget that extends the base stateful widget. That home page widget inside of it holds the state of however many times that counter has been hit. Okay. And there's an application that wraps that whole thing up. So we've got our app that's a stateless widget, okay, that runs the application. Inside of it, this builds a material app. It's a demo. The home page is called My Home Page. That is a stateful widget. So the app itself is like the engine that runs it. Inside of it is a widget that keeps track of how many counts. It keeps track of how many counts by creating a home page state. Here, when we initially create that My Home Page class, it creates the initial state, which is a counter at 0, and then whenever we hit the button, we increment that counter plus plus. The part where we hit the button, on pressed, increment counter. Here's our floating action button. That's our floating action button, the blue plus. On pressed, we call increment counter. If we right click on that and say go to declaration, that moves us up to the part of the code that actually does it, right? And that's where we set the counter to be counter plus plus. That's basically it. So that's all our first Flutter app really does, but it's nicely designed in Dart by using a set of widgets. That's really the point. There's not a whole bunch of code here, really, that's necessary to get it done. So let's look at making something a little bit more complicated. So this our initial install is all set. We're done there. This startup name generator is what I'm going to go through next. This is actually part of the Flutter site. It's like their tutorial for writing your first real app. Okay, so in addition to the link to the Flutter install, in the notes there's going to be a whole bunch of different Flutter examples for you to look at. I won't go through and click on every single one of them. I'll pick just one to check. We've looked at these in class before, at least a couple of them. But what I'd like you to do for this week is get Flutter installed. Okay, number one, get Flutter installed like I just did. And then go through this set of links and check out a bunch of different stuff. This is all stuff you can either just view on the web and download, or download via GitHub. So pretty cool stuff in there. Let's check out this startup name generator. We're writing our first Flutter app. We're going to build a simple Flutter app that has a stateful widget and it has an infinite lazily loaded list. So the idea is we can keep generating startup names for our startup name generator if we don't see ones that we like, but we're not generating 40 gajillion of them at once. The screen can only hold 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever. And the idea is we're going to use a lazily loaded list. That's really one of the important parts of this tutorial. If you Google that, you'll see a lot of results for that term, and this is something common in mobile application development. So lazy loading is a design pattern. We'll talk about what that means too. But we're going to defer initialization of an object until the very last point where it's actually needed. So you see this a lot in web pages. Like the generic template loads, and it has a header. It's got a box where the data is going to be, and maybe something fails with a page and nothing loads in that box, or you see that there's a generic template and then it takes a while for the actual data to load in. Steam's web pages do this. A lot of Electron apps do this. Steam and Epic Game Store will do this internally also in the way that they load. I'm assuming if you open these up, you may have seen this before, where it takes a while for all the images to show up, for instance. So same kind of idea. It's not loading all that stuff ahead of time. It's waiting until the exact time that you're going to be looking at it. So it's an important computer science design pattern. And the idea with a design pattern is that's the point of classes like object-oriented programming and data structures, and a little bit in mobile app. It's kind of the point in part. We're trying to teach design patterns for mobile application development. So things like a lazily loaded list, like we saw at Wikipedia, is a design pattern used in computer programming and used in mobile apps most definitely. The idea is we don't want to use any processing power, aka battery power, if we don't need to use it. So the other thing that I wanted to point out with that is that software design patterns is really cool stuff for you to check out and learn about in general. So like there are things that can come up in interview questions sometimes also too. So they're good to have frame of reference about. So like a singleton, this is limiting a class so that there's only one object across an entire namespace series of different classes, that kind of stuff. So we may have something like a thread pool manager. Okay, that's a common singleton, maybe something like that, that is managing across a large application, like something like Deluge. Oops. Not sure what that means. But an application like Deluge, if I could spell it, for downloading torrents. It's written in Python. It has some kind of pool management because there could be more than one download happening at once, but you only want one manager at all times. The factory method, that's like learning how object creation works and using a certain style of creating objects. It's kind of an older way to do it, but anyway, I won't go through all the design patterns. You can read through those on your own, but the idea is to start thinking about those things in terms of upper level programming courses. You're thinking about design patterns. You're thinking about how do I learn how to make stuff the most efficient way possible. So in our main.dart, my example there that I already have, why don't I make a new one? We'll leave that one there. We'll make a new project, and let's see. Thinking I want to put this in GitHub desktop also and link to it. So let's make a new repository. That's going to be the Flutter startup name generator. And I can't remember if there's a gitignore for Flutter. There isn't one built in. It's MIT license. So we create this repository on the D drive and publish this. It's going to be just a copy of this. but we'll do this so we have a copy that I'll put in the show notes. I'm always saying show notes. In the notes for this week's video. It's mobile app, and we have our example here, and in our GitHub desktop, here is where our project wants to go. So we're going to make a new Flutter application, but our project location is going to be here. And we're going to call this startup name project name. We'll call this startup name generator. SNG, yep, that stuff is all good. And let's go back to our, so this is going to generate a new project and a new main.dart. We're going to replace that main.dart with this one, then we're going to talk about what's going on there. So this main.dart is very simple, just showing us the basics of what we can start with. We have a app bar at the top and a body with a centered hello world. I think there's a screenshot that shows this right afterwards. You can run this and see it. Nothing too much to see, but that's the beginnings of it. The next thing we do is we're going to do a startup name generator. So basically at the end of this, we're going to have a, like we saw before, never-ending list of random startup names like Church Edge or Dutch Hole or Mass Tent. And to get those, we're going to import an English words package, a package in Dart. This is one of the advantages of using platforms like Dart, Flutter and Dart, because they have access to things like pub.dev. Pub.dev is a huge repository of different packages that you can use for programming in Dart and using different databases or managing different kinds of XLM, whatever that is, XML, managing different kinds of processes. So anything pretty much that you can think about, there's already something out there for you to check out. So this one that we're going to use is called English Words. There's a link to its spot. It's published repository here in pub.dev. And to do that, we're going to go to our pubspec.yaml file. This is yet another markup language file, and that handles assets and dependencies for a Flutter app. So if we open up our project, here's our pubspec.yaml, and we want to add this English words. So if we look in here, we've got the SDK Flutter dependency, and not too much else going on here. The Cupertino icons. We'll add this right underneath Cupertino icons, just like our example. Now we're importing English words. Flutter notices that we have packages that are new. We should be able to get those. And do we have to upgrade any packages? I think we should be good there. And after this, we pull those packages in our main.dart. We're going to now use that package. So at the top of main.dart, including material.dart, we're also going to include a our English words.dart. It's complaining about it not being used yet because we haven't used it in the code, but that's okay. Again, this material.dart, remember, is the material library. Oops. So this is their design toolkit that allows you to use their UI elements without having to design everything from scratch. Pretty cool. So we've got our import, and then we're going to use that import. So down here, we're going to, under our widget, get a new random pair from word pair, which comes from our import. And then instead of just saying hello world, we're going to spit out that word pair on the screen. So let me build that. We'll see how long this takes. For some reason it was kind of slow last time. In between downloading the SDK image and getting this to run last time was like a half an hour, but that was the first time. So there's our awesome startup name generator. We've got our first combination. Pretty cool. So now that's us actually using that import, right? And they also talk about hot reload. So that's when, like in that case, I hit stop and stopped my debug because I knew I was going to add some more code, but we could just change the code, and once we make that change, we can hit hot reload or save the project, and there'll be an automatically updated version of our app on that device. So, and we saw that in class. But all right, so at the bottom of our main.dart, we're going to add the beginnings of our stateful application. And in addition to that, we have a class that is going to reference random words. Let me see, why don't I bump up our code size a little bit. And this is our, oops. I thought it was under code and appearance, code style, Java, dirt, and general. Man, I always forget where this is at. Every IDE has that under, oops. So our random words stateful widget is going to create a random word state, and our build in random's word state. Then our child is going to use random words instead of that word pair. Alright, so the next step is changing that to an infinite list. Let's talk about this first. So, we added a class called random words that we're calling from our child to actually spit out that pair. And the idea with that is that this random words class creates its initial state by calling random word state, and it gets a set of words, stores them, and sends them back, basically. Alright, so we're going to extend this so that we can have a plethora of these, basically, in our next step. Why don't I start this up, and I can leave this running for our hot reload when we change it. This might take 1 second to start up, though. While it's starting, I'm going to go back and I'm going to push free classes one more time. Maybe 2 more times after this. We'll see. 450 Ivy League courses. That's pretty awesome. Unity stuff, super cool. This has a link to a couple other ones. This one I don't think I looked at previously. But this list is really cool also. Coursera, Yale, Rosetta Stone, Khan Academy. Lots of cool stuff here. Alright. So now we've got that started up. Now we're going to change this to have an infinite list. So under our random word state, we're going to make an array of word pairs, and then we're also going to change the font size. So this is in random word state. Right underneath that class definition, we add those two guys. We're enforcing privacy based on that underscore, and then we're adding a build suggestions widget to the random word state class. We have some hot reload issues in there because we're looking for a widget build row. That has to be added here also, so it knows what that means. Okay. Then in our random word state, we're going to change it so that we return different scaffolding. So in the random word state, we're going to change our build so it returns build suggestions. That returns our list view, and we're going to change the title in our home. So this is again up in our my app. So title and home. Let's see what we get there. There we go. So let's go back over all this and explain what's going on. So let's see if we have our infinite lazily loaded list. Yep, looks good. So a couple different things going on here. Let's see. Hold on, let me get this straightened out. So our material app sets a title and then tells tells Dart where our home is going to be at. Our home is random words. If we right click on that and go to declaration, random words is a class that extends the stateful widget, keeps track of startup names it's already generated. When it starts, it calls create state, and that calls random word state. When this is created, this is where the action happens. So this is kind of like the controller piece in our MVC, our model view controller. Okay, so this is all in one class, but this is the piece where the action is. All right, a lot of that is starting up where the app is, what's controlling the app, what's keeping state of the app. And here is what's generating that actual code and doing all the actual work. So we make an array of suggestions. And an array of suggestions is just an array of word pairs. Those word pairs are defined in our import. If you go to declaration, this is opening a file. If we look at the path up there, this comes from our import from our pubspec.yaml. So that's our word pair. We have a list of those, an array, of those, and then a larger font. Just change the font size so it's a bit bigger. Our widget returns a scaffold that has an app bar with a title of startup name generator at the top, and then a body to build the suggestions. The body, if we go to that declaration, is another widget that returns a list view.builder with some padding around the edges. And for each item, if it's odd, it returns a divider. So this is item, it finds the index if it's larger, greater than or equal to the suggestions.length. Let's add it, and then return building a row of that. Building a row of that, if we go to the declaration of this, returns this list tile, each piece inside there. That is the title itself is Pascal case, meaning upper lowercase, in the style of that larger font. That larger font is what we declared up there. So the idea of this with hot reload is I could change this from lowercase back to Pascal case and just save it, and I see that automatically updates. So pretty fancy, huh? Cool stuff. Cool stuff. So the idea is for you to do what I just did, step by step. And I know I went through it kind of fast, but let's go through this code again one more time to make sure that we know what's up. Our void main is like the void public static void main in a C# class in a console. This is like the starting point. In most programming languages that are upper level languages, right, there's a void main that starts the app. When we start this, we're going to run app, built-in Dart method, and we're going to send it an instance of our app class we created. That's a stateless widget on its own. All of it does is it makes a material app. Inside that material app, the home page for that material app is something called random words. Random words is a stateful widget, keeps track of startup names that it's generated. That goes through a process of generating a series of word pairs in an array, and then building a title of startup name generator and a body that is based on a list view with a series of dividers. Okay, so check that out, get that set up. We'll have a test that'll have questions related to Android Studio, Java, activities, layouts, Flutter, Dart, widgets, that kind of stuff. And make sure to check out all those free courses that you can online, and we will see you next week.